Welcome back to After School. I'm Brian Muraresku, author of the Immortality Key, and today we'll be exploring the work of Karen Armstrong. She is one of the world's best-known living writers on religion, and also a heroine of mine. And together we'll be talking about the mysticism of antiquity and what that all means for us today. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Si enim comprehendis, non est Deus. If you think you've understood God, that ain't God. These words were penned by St. Augustine roughly 1600 years ago. Now, whether you're a person of faith, no faith at all, or somewhere in between, it matters how we define God as a species. Strange as it sounds, the fate of the planet could very well depend on our definition of God. Again, even if that word means nothing to you, or it conjures vague images of an elderly man with a beard sitting in the clouds, or maybe it's synonymous with organized religion, institutions, traditions, beliefs, which, for you, might be the compass of your existence, or just utterly irrelevant. For all of us, the definition of God matters. It says everything about how we understand ourselves, how we treat each other in the earth with its abundance of life, and how we grapple with the mystery of the cosmos. I always turn to Joseph Campbell to help explain.
God is a thought. God is an idea. But its reference is to something that transcends all thinking.
So there's a paradox, and that's kind of the whole point. Si comprehendis, non est Deus. God, whatever that means, is not something to be understood by the rational mind. No institution can claim ownership. In fact, the word's meaningless. Following up on Augustine, the Jesuit Karl Rahner, one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century, was no fan of God, said we shouldn't use the word for 50 years. It confused his notion of God as the holy mystery, incomprehensible and impenetrable, above us, around us, but also within us. Despite the paradox, there can be no defining God without us. In the ancient world, that Karl Rahner definition could be found across the world's religions, from east to west. In Confucianism, qi was the essence of being, a force the Chinese regarded as unknowable, recondite. For a Taoist, this sacred force was at the heart of mundane existence, and yet this vital energy flows through us in some mysterious way. In Hinduism, God isn't a dude in the clouds. It's Brahman, the foundation of all reality, the beingness on which all things depend. Atman, on the other hand, is our individual soul. In the Advaita Vedanta school of Hinduism, that Atman is identical to Brahman, the ultimate reality. In other words, divinity resides in us. In Buddhism, there's no personal God, but that compassionate mystery could be called the essence of the entire cosmos, an eternal, permanent, immutable, pure, and self-sufficient force that unites all beings, draws them into a coherent whole, and universally illumines the human mind, enabling us to cultivate a capacity for goodness. Now, these Eastern definitions of God come from the preeminent scholar Karen Armstrong. The author of a couple dozen books, translated into 45 languages, Armstrong has been described as the world's best-known living writer on religion. Before becoming a lover of comparative theology, she was a Catholic nun for about 7 years, until she realized she was bad at praying and wanted nothing to do with God. So Armstrong began looking to the sages, mystics, and prophets of antiquity. Her focus was the Axial Age, that period between the 8th and 3rd centuries BC, when many of our religions came into being. Not just Confucianism and Taoism in East Asia, or Hinduism and Buddhism in South Asia, but the mysteries of the Greco-Roman world at the root of Western civilization, and the rise of the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, what would later become Christianity, and eventually Islam. It's called axial because so much of our cultural history turns on this ancient age. In fact, if you just add up the Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists of today, in big round numbers, that's about 6 of the planet's 8 billion people. At their core, Armstrong sees more similarity than difference. After years of devouring her books, I finally reached out for a conversation. The incomprehensible God of the East, that sacred force, could also be found in the West, she reminded me. Once upon a time, before the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries confined God to the sky, the monotheistic faiths had the same idea as the East. Don't forget about Thomas Aquinas, said Armstrong, perhaps the most influential Christian thinker of the medieval period.
He had the right idea about God. He said, God is everywhere, and wherever God is there holy. So God is in every single leaf, every single tree, is everywhere. It transfuses nature. And that was exactly the way the peoples of the world had always cultivated their sense of the natural world as sacred and divine, not as a god stuck up in the heavens, but as a force, a sacred force that imbues the whole of reality.
That reality includes us. God is not separate from us, agree the traditions of the axial age. We participate in divinity. We carry a divine spark. But it's tough to find that spark or experience that incomprehensible God until we stand outside ourselves. As Armstrong herself came to realize, it wasn't about praying to or worshiping the external God of her youth or engaging in cold research, merely thinking and writing about all things holy. Her encounter with the mystery occurred when scholarship became ecstasy. By dwelling on each text, each idea, each spirituality, she imagined herself actually feeling the rapture of these ancient sages, mystics, and prophets.
And there were moments in my study when I would occasionally feel touched by some form of awe or wonder or delight. I realized my work was becoming a kind of meditation, the kind of meditation that I'd been unable to do in the convent.
There's that paradox again. The rational, discursive mind, engaged in scholarship, spontaneously interrupted by an experience of awe that transcends thinking. A mystery on paper becomes a mystery of the heart. The personal God that Armstrong could never find becomes the impersonal Brahman of the East, or the God of Thomas Aquinas that imbues the whole of reality. Interestingly, it's this definition of God that also captivated Albert Einstein. Referring to the 17th century Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza, Einstein once wrote, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world." In a separate letter, dated February 12, 1950, Einstein went further. A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. The striving to free oneself from this delusion is the one issue of true religion. That freeing oneself from the confines of the ego, that moment of ecstasy, that experience of eternity right here and now, which Joseph Campbell called the function of life, seems to be the answer for scholars like Armstrong, scientists like Einstein, and the mystics in the footnotes of history. The esoteric traditions of each Abrahamic faith embrace this paradoxical definition of God. At the root of our true self, past the optical delusion, maybe we're all gods and goddesses in disguise. In the Immortality Key, I included a few examples. The Sufis, the mystics of Islam, have been called the impatient ones. Rather than wait until their actual physical death, the spiritual experts of the world's second biggest religion seek the recovery of one's full identity in this lifetime. Rumi, the 13th century Sufi master, put it this way: "If you could get rid of yourself just once, the secret of secrets would open to you. The face of the unknown, hidden beyond the universe, would appear on the mirror of your perception." Likewise, the Kabbalists, the mystics of Judaism, pursue self-annihilation to reach the world of the divine nothingness, ayin in Hebrew. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, a modern-day scholar, says, just as the death of each creature is in turn a rehearsal for the death of a species and a galaxy and a cosmos, the great rhythm of going out and returning, now this kind of death is not an end, but only the beginning of a transformation that will generate a rebirth. You cannot be reborn until you are willing to die. The German theologian Meister Eckhart lived a generation after Rumi. He was the mystic par excellence of medieval Christianity. Like the Sufis and the Kabbalists, Meister Eckhart emphasized the practice of self-nullification. If you could not yourself for an instant, indeed I say less than an instant, you would possess all. In her new book, Sacred Nature, Karen Armstrong highlights this self-emptying as the potential answer to the survival of our species and the planet. There's a word for it in Greek, kenosis. Without it, there is no transcendence of the self, which means there's no real compassion for others, for plant and animal life, for the earth herself. People are just annoying things, and everything else, an object, a resource, a world devoid of meaning where no one and nothing carries that divine spark. While most of the world is focused on global emissions and carbon neutrality, Armstrong is asking us to seriously reconsider our definition of God as the dude in the clouds, and to practice the self-annihilation, the self-nullification of kenosis, to actually experience that mystical God of Einstein and the contemplatives. Gus Speth, founder of the National Resource Defense Council, might tend to agree. I used to think the top environmental problems facing the world were global warming, environmental degradation, and ecosystem collapse, and that we scientists could fix those problems with enough science. But I was wrong. The real problem is not those three items, but greed, selfishness, and apathy. And for that, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. But the Buddha did. Enter the science of compassion. Before we turned yoga into sexy exercise and meditation into a great way to relax, this was the origin of contemplative practice.
But the whole point of getting enlightenment is to get rid of the self, as it were, to subdue the ego. And the Buddha, it happened to him as a little boy first. The story is that one day he was taken out to watch the ceremony of the first ploughing of the fields. And he looked and he saw that the ploughing had killed a lot of little insects and wild animals and plants, which were all lying, dying and dead. And a great sorrow filled his heart. And it took him completely out of himself. And it said that he sat immediately in the yogic tradition and achieved a yogic trance. We often see him, don't we, with a sort of inward looking, peaceful and almost looking down within himself. Not at all. The texts tell us that he spent his time sending his thoughts out to every corner of the world and not leaving it until he had adopted a sense of equanimity, respect, and love for every single one of these creatures, whether they were pleasant or unpleasant, whether they were beautiful or ugly, even if they seemed evil. And that was how he achieved enlightenment.
That's pretty good kenosis, a high bar. But we're not all called to be Buddhas. Instead, Armstrong suggests a little death every day, hour by hour. Whether that's the Confucian practice of quiet sitting, just getting off social media and being present in nature for a few minutes, or a simple act of kindness. What did Mother Teresa say? Not all of us can do great things, but small things with great love. Then there's the spiritual disciplines of the contemplatives. They chant, pray, and fast their way to kenosis. Sometimes seclude themselves in caves, wander in labyrinths, whirl in ecstasy. In the prehistory of our species, the more archaic techniques had the same goal: drumming, scarification, perhaps the ingestion of visionary plants or fungi. Nowadays, that kenosis has been reported in carefully controlled scientific experiments where a growing body of literature is charting the relationship between psychedelic occasion mystical experience and nature connectedness, a potential antidote to Einstein's optical delusion, where Mother Earth is no longer just a metaphor, but part of that same holy mystery we once called God, above us, all around us, and within us, in the eternity of the here and now, where the one and the many coexist, where the past and the future collide, where to be empty is to be full, where death is awakening. where everything and nothing matters. And as Ram Dass once said, it's all perfect in its unbearable imperfection. Kind of a paradox. Then again, si comprehendis, non est Deus.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of After School. If you enjoyed the information in this video and want to dive deeper, I would highly recommend Karen Armstrong's new book, Sacred Nature. Right now, you can log on to audible.com/afterschool or text afterschool to 500-500 to listen to Sacred Nature for free. As a matter of fact, you can start listening with a free 30-day Audible trial and get full access to thousands and thousands of all-you-can-listen audiobooks, original entertainment, and podcasts, including the Plus catalog. And if for some reason you got an extra 15 hours and want to listen to this voice talk about the ritual use of psychedelics among the ancient Greeks and Romans and potentially the earliest Christians, you can also listen to the Immortality Key, the secret history of the religion with no name. Just log on to audible.com/afterschool or text afterschool to 500-500. Thanks for watching.